Hey, Mama. Welcome to Marketing Without Socials for Moms. I'm your host, Andria Singletary, daughter of the king, wife, mama of two, and visibility strategist for moms who want to make social media optional. When I'm not grabbing the 100th go-go squeeze applesauce for my kids, you can find me curled up on the couch with a homemade chai tea latte and a good book. So tell me, have you reached the point in your business where you are done with social media burnout and ready to make social media optional? Are you consistently posting reels and carousels and showing up in stories, but sporadically signing new clients? Or maybe your season of life has drastically changed, meaning you have less time to show up on socials to grow your business. Trust me, I get it. I have been in each of these scenarios at some point in my business journey. It wasn't until I started leaning into marketing strategies outside of social media that I started having more predictability in my sales and growing my business in a way that supported my current season of life. And I want that for you, Mama. Each week, I'm giving you the inside scoop on how to increase your visibility and sales through podcasting, email marketing, and collaborations. All right, Mama, now grab your coffee, notebook, and pen, and let's dive into today's episode. Hey, Mama. So one question I often get from clients is, how do I get more podcast listeners? How do I grow my podcast audience and different things like that? And so I wanted to share, 3 different ways I use platforms like Threads and Facebook groups to grow my podcast audience, to gain more listeners and everything like that. But before I get into that, I do want to say that downloads aren't everything. I see a lot of people, get so focused on, I want to hit 1,000 downloads per month and different things like that, or 1,000 downloads per episode, different things like that. First things first, you do not need a huge podcast audience to sign clients. I do not have a large podcast audience by any means, but I consistently sign clients from my podcast. The other thing is that downloads do not mean a thing. That is nothing but a vanity metric. Just because somebody is downloading your podcast episodes does not mean they're actually listening to it or listening to them from start to finish. I look more at podcast episode consumption rates, looking at how much of a podcast episode people are listening to and how many people are consistently listening to at least 60% or more of my podcast episodes. That tells me more than how many people are downloading my podcast episodes. So I want to preface that first. So you don't need a huge audience to see conversions, and downloads don't really mean that much. You look at them, especially if you see you've been consistently, having a certain number of downloads and all of a sudden it drastically drops. You do want to pay attention to those kind of things, but don't put so much value into the downloads thinking that if you get higher downloads, you'll actually start signing more clients. Because I've worked with podcast hosts who literally had over 200K downloads and was not signing any clients from her podcast. She had a lot of people downloading it, but she had nothing to show for it. So just wanted to put that out there. So the first thing is that, for Threads and Facebook groups, you can leverage these platforms to generate content ideas. Now you may be wondering, okay, how does that actually tie into my audience growth? Well, the reality is that if you are creating content that your ideal listener wants, they are going to listen to your podcast because you are making it about them. And so I have found that Threads and Facebook groups have been such great platforms for getting content ideas because people are always asking questions. So Facebook groups where your ideal listener is hanging out. Threads, everybody shares every single little thought that they have on Threads. And so you literally can see what questions your ideal people are asking based off of, the posts they're creating in Facebook groups and what they're posting on Threads. And this is something that I actually supported a client with she booked a strategy session with me. And so we went into the Facebook group where her ideal listener was hanging out. And so we just typed in like a few keywords specific to her niche to kind of see like what questions were they asking around that topic. And I kid you not, she walked away with so many content ideas based off of questions that they were asking. And these were things that she didn't consider because she thought it was stuff that her ideal listener already knew, had an understanding on. She was like, oh, I didn't realize so many people were asking questions about this specific thing. Like, I didn't think it was something they wanted to hear more about. So I didn't create a podcast episode on it. And so you really get to see like what is going on, because sometimes we can think our audience is at a certain point or stage or know so much, when in reality, they do have questions around those things because they don't fully understand it, or there's still some things that they need like clarification on and different things like that. So those platforms are really, really good. Like, you can search for keywords in Facebook groups or even on Threads. You can search like in the little search bar, just certain keywords to kind of see like what conversations have been around those specific topics related to your niche, related to, how you support your clients and different things like that. Back in episode 45, I talk about how I use Facebook groups to generate content ideas, when I had a small audience that wasn't like maybe very responsive, when I would poll them or, do market research surveys and different things like that. And so I walk you through that process in great detail in that episode. So you can check that out, episode 45. I will make sure to link that in the show notes as well. Okay, the other thing that Threads and Facebook groups are really good for is keyword research. Now, again, this may seem like something that doesn't connect directly to your growth, but it does. If you want to grow your podcast audience and you want to grow it with the right people, you need to be doing keyword research. And essentially, keywords are the words that your ideal person is typing in Google or whatever, search platform they're looking on. The words that they're typing in related to your niche, to your industry, to how you serve and support your clients. That's what it is at the end of the day. And so Threads and Facebook groups are really great for that as well. You can capture the exact language that your people are using around these specific topics. So again, with the same client that I did the podcast strategy session with, I also showed her how to pull out those keywords or phrases that her ideal client uses related to her niche in those same Facebook groups that we were searching in and that she generated the content ideas from. And so this works the same way for Threads. You can see what language your ideal clients are using to describe their problems, the transformations they desire, and different things like that. Like, that's the biggest thing around keyword research. It's not just like, oh, let me choose the keywords that have the highest search volume. No, it's specific to the people you are called to serve. It's specific to your ideal client. What words or what language are they using to describe this specific thing? How are they talking about their problem? What is it that they actually want? Not everybody is looking for, the 20K months and, sit on the beach with a laptop and different things like that. I feel like I pick at that example all the time, but you get what I'm saying. Like, you may have this idea in your head about what your people want, but you cannot confirm or deny it until you actually hear from them what it is that they want. And so if you are finding that, market research isn't being very fruitful for you, or you're just not like your audience isn't being very responsive, you can get around that by using Threads and Facebook groups to basically find those answers, like find out what it is that your people are talking about and what problems they're having and different things like that. Okay, so the last thing is Threads and Facebook groups. So doing that keyword research and generating those content ideas, it really helps you turn your podcast into a resource library. Now, let me break down, how this ties into, getting more podcast listeners. So, back in episode 89, I talk about this idea of leveraging your podcast as a resource library. And so this is a concept that I'm also going to be teaching the mamas inside of the Social Detox Accelerator. And so ideally, you want to create those core podcast episodes that answer frequently asked questions or highlights your frameworks and your processes and really gives people a general idea of what it's like to work with you. And so I call that your resource library, especially when you think about like questions that you are asked so many times by different people. Like, how much easier would it be to say, oh, I have a podcast episode on that, go listen to such and such episode, right? Like, and so you can create this resource library around those questions. And so for me, threads and Facebook groups have been a game changer for my podcast growth. Now that I have been podcasting for over 200 episodes and I've really followed that, turning your podcast into like a resource library, I've followed that process, that framework. I have built this amazing resource library in which somebody asks a question and 9 times out of 10, I can say, I have a podcast episode on that. I recently in threads and then in this program I'm part of, I recently had people ask about, the best way for completely leaving Instagram as a business owner. And guess what? I have a podcast episode on that and I was able to share it with both of these women. And the best part about this approach is that, you're really able to quickly show someone that and understand their problem and that you have the solution. This has not only helped me significantly grow my podcast. Hello, I just had my highest downloads month ever in October, but also has helped me attract my dream clients and work with some of the most amazing women, all because they had a question. And I didn't just give them the answer. I said, hey, I have a podcast episode that breaks that down and answers that specific question. Would you like the link? And you know what that does? It turns into them binging my podcast and learning more and getting their other questions answered. And eventually they'll convert into my offers. And so that is what the power of really creating this resource library and being very strategic in the type of content you're creating for your podcast. You want to connect the dots for your listeners. And so you can create podcast content that sends them on a specific path that will eventually lead to them converting into your offer, realizing that working with you is going to get them to where they want to be. But you have to create the strategic content instead of just throwing random things out there. I've even been seeing people like on threads post a thread about like, hey, what things should I talk about on my podcast? Now, I get it. Like they're asking for feedback, but the reality is that they are asking everybody. Like they're not specific in who their podcast is for, who their ideal listener is. And so they're going to get all these random responses when in reality, is that something that your ideal listener, your person has a question about, wants to learn more about? And if not, you shouldn't be creating content around it. Like your podcast is for your listeners. It's not about you. Now, does that mean you can't infuse yourself in it? No, your personality can be every single part of this podcast, but the type of content you create, it needs to be about the listener. It needs to support them. It needs to answer their questions. It needs to show them, hey, this is your problem. I got the solution. Okay? That's like that at the end of the day, like that's what it's all about. So here's what I want you to take away from this episode. Instead of wasting your time posting about your latest episodes on Instagram as a reel or in your stories, focus on sharing specific episodes with the people literally looking for the answer or solution that you have. So, as I said, with this whole idea with the resource library, I usually take like every week, probably an hour or two where I will just kind of scroll threads or scroll in Facebook groups where my idol listener is hanging out to kind of see what questions they've asked. And if I see that they asked a question that I have a podcast episode, I comment. I say, hey, I just talked about this on my podcast. Would you like the link? Because with Facebook groups, sometimes people, like some groups have rules where you can't post a link. But like with threads, I can say, hey, I have a podcast episode that actually answers a specific question. Here's the link if you want to check it out. That will gain more traction than you creating these reels and these Instagram stories about your newest podcast episodes. Because again, somebody is asking a specific question that they want answered. And if you have a podcast episode that answers that question, they're going to go listen. And if they resonate with the content, if they vibe with you, like they like you, they like your personality and everything, guess what? They're going to go on a binging spree. And eventually, they're either going to want to get into your world more, like joining your email list, following you on socials, or they're going to reach out and say, hey, I would like to work with you. What is the best offer? Or they're going to know which is the best offer, and they're going to sign up and opt into that specific offer. That is better results compared to, again, posting on socials and hoping the right people see it. You have to be intentional with your time. And even when it comes to growing your podcast, you want to get your podcast in front of the people who actually need it, who are actually looking for these types of solutions. You just don't want any and everybody to listen. You want people who truly need and want what you have to offer, who are looking for a solution to the problem they have, and you have that solution. So that's like one of the things too I want you to kind of take away with you from this episode is really looking at, okay, do I want any and everybody to listen to this podcast, or do I want the people who actually want to see results, who actually are invested in the sense of they have this problem and they really want to solve it right now, and I have the solution for them. Okay? You don't have to just get any and everybody to listen to your podcast. You just need the right people to listen. And so those people who are asking those questions that you have the answer to, those are your people. And the other thing with this approach too is, when you can step in and not only answer someone's question, but also direct them to a specific resource, aka your podcast episode on that topic, that demonstrates your authority and starts the trust building process. And the best part is that people can find that thread or Facebook post that you shared the link to your podcast in weeks, months, and years later. I've literally had this happen where it was probably something I had like a comment I had shared a year ago, and somebody will like the comment, kind of indicating that they're going to check out the podcast. So it continues to work for you even further down the line. Like, it's not like Instagram content that goes off to die within so many hours or days. At the end of the day, it's all about working smarter, not harder. Okay, so applications are open for the April 2025 cohort of the Social Detox Accelerator. If you want to join us in April and really look at, okay, how can I strategically leverage my podcast and my email list to grow my audience with the right people and start nurturing and converting these people into my offers, so that way I can serve more people. I can help the people who need my help. Then you need to join us inside of the accelerator. Head on over to momaturnedmompreneur.com/social detox to learn more about the accelerator and to submit your application now. All right, mama, I'll catch you in the next episode. Hey, mama. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to hang with me. I would love to keep the conversation going. So head to momaturnedmompreneur.com/marketing without socials to join my email community. I share even more tips and strategies for building a business that doesn't rely on social media and one that fits your current season of life, as well as more behind the scenes of mom and business life. All right, Mama, that's it for today, but I'll catch up with you again next week.